Hello and welcome to Homicide Hobbies. I'm Andy,
And I'm Claire.
and we're here to talk about some of the disturbing things that go on in the world, past and present. We feel like not knowing doesn't mean the crazy doesn't exist.
So we're going to scar you with the knowing.
Enjoy. All right, so what do you got for us today, Claire?
Today, we're headed to a place where more than 750 Civil War battles were fought.
Virginia?
Nope. It's a state that is smaller than most all other United States.
Rhode Island.
The Civil War battles. It's also where pine saw was invented. It's also where the life expectancy at birth is the lowest of all the states and apparently has always been, so they haven't changed nothing. Elvis and Britney Spears were born here.
Louisiana?
Close, Mississippi.
She was born in Mississippi? I thought she was from Louisiana.
She might have been raised there, but she's born in Mississippi.
All right.
In particular in the 1950s.
Hey, you know what this case is also?
Hmm.
This is season 4 of Homicide Hobbies. Happy anniversary.
Anyway, so on August 31st, 1955, two boys are out fishing in the Tallahatchie River. They would find a nude, badly disfigured body. One that had been shot just above the right ear and beaten beyond recognition, and had a 75-pound cotton mill fan tied to his neck with barbed wire.
Somebody didn't want that body found.
He would be identified as 14-year-old Emmett Till.
Oh.
Yeah. So Emmett wasn't from Mississippi. He was born in Chicago, Illinois, to his mother, Mamie. Now, Mamie's family was from Mississippi, but they moved to Chicago as part of the Great Migration, which was basically when, from 1916 to 1970, a lot of African American people moved from the southern states to the northern states to get away from the long-standing racist violence, all of that. Now, some of her family not obviously, but some of her family ends up staying in Mississippi. Because I think sometimes it's just like, that's what you know. This is where your roots are, you know?
Yeah.
That can be powerful too. But Emmett's parents would separate when he's just a toddler after his mom found out his dad was a cheater and would assault his mom.
Okay.
And she would in turn toss scalding water on him. Yeah, so a judge would be like, okay, you're either going to jail or the army. And he picks the army and off he goes. Now, just a side note, because this doesn't have anything to do with it, but so you don't ask me a question later of where his dad is. His dad ends up getting court-martialed for murdering an Italian woman and then is executed in 1945 in Italy.
Oh, well.
So when his pa's out of the picture, he's not coming back.
It sounds like the judge that sent him away saved his mom's life.
Mm-hmm.
Because if he would have stuck around, she probably would have ended up dead too.
Yeah. Okay, well, when Emmett turns 6... he's going to get polio that leaves him with weak ankles that make him need to wear special shoes. And then he also would be left with a stutter. Now, that didn't seem to keep Emmett's spirits down any because he's going to grow into a very lighthearted, jokester kind of a young man who will go back and forth between pranks with his friends and just seems like a very nice young man.
Okay.
Now, by 1950, Emmett and his mom will pack up and move to Detroit, Michigan for a short while before moving in with Mamie's mom, Alma Spearman. Now, I didn't get too far into it, but just so you know, she ends up finding another feller, and that's the reason for the move. And then when they separate is when she moves back with her mom. But just so you know, that doesn't work out. Her and Emmett go to move in with her mom because then it's, you have family help and she's still a single mom at this point.
Right.
Now, Emmett and Mamie would live on the second floor of the 3-bedroom apartment and the other relatives would live on the second and first floor. I don't know who all lived there because it seemed like maybe a sister or anybody else. Whoever else was living in there, they split up the levels. It seemed more like a townhouse to me.
Sounds like it.
But it made being a single mom and living with the family easier with having somebody to look after Emmett. And Emmett was super helpful. He would help with the cleaning, the laundry, even dabbled in some cooking. So now that you got a good handle on the kind of young man Emmett was, we'll fast forward to that summer of 1955. Now, school's out for the summer. Emmett's great aunt, Elizabeth Wright, and Emmett's uncle or great uncle, 64-year-old Moses, invite Emmett to come down to Money, Mississippi for a visit. Now, Emmett's mom really didn't like the idea of him going so far, but after a while of being worn down, she agrees to let him go. She'd also agree to let Emmett wear his dad's ring to show to his cousins. So she'd put Emmett on a train to head for summer. I can't write or read. So she would put Emmett on a train to head to Mississippi for the summer to spend with his cousins. He'd arrive in Mississippi on August 21st, 1955. Now, a pin in that, Mississippi isn't the same kind of life that Emmett had been used to. Basically, in this time period, in the South, the whites don't really accept that slavery's over. They don't want to accept blacks as social or racially equal. And up north, where they're still segregated in practice, it's not illegal like it is in the South because they have the Jim Crow laws. That makes sense?
Yeah.
I mean, it's still the United States is segregated, but up north is more of a... You got some people who would rather not.
They're separate, but it's not against the law.
Right.
Down south, you're going to be prosecuted.
Uh-huh.
And realistically, probably just executed.
Now, there's also a Supreme Court case, Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka in 1954, that unanimously ruled the racial segregation of public schools was unconstitutional and a cornerstone for the whole separate but equal, not in fact being equal at all. But just keep that in mind of the turmoil the U.S. is in, because this is like the beginnings of the civil rights movement, so everybody's very strong opinioned.
Right.
But not to get off the focus of Emmett, because that's what this story is about. So for the Brown versus Board of Education, that whole thing, the Alabama state senator was not happy about that decision and would say, what's the real purpose of this? To open the bedroom doors for all white women to black men? He doesn't say black men, but I just don't, you get what he's saying. Now,
he's saying a word that we're not supposed to be saying.
Now, this time chunk is also referred to as a climate of white hysteria about black sexuality. And by the way, I don't remember learning about any of this in school. But that's the kind of area Emmett's headed towards for his visit. It's called white hysteria. I was like,
that sounds like an awful place for him to be going to, unfortunately.
But anyway, that's where he arrives to spend the summer with his cousins. Now, his cousins, they're sharecroppers, so he would pitch in and help pick cottonways down there. And after one particular day of picking cotton, he's about 3 days into his visit, Emmett and his cousins head into town to go to Bryant's Grocery and Meat Market. Per usual, and that market seemed to service a lot of sharecroppers towards the end of the days. And they were doing exactly what you expect of teen boys, screwing off, and, they would go in and buy some candy. Now, the woman behind the counter is 21-year-old Carolyn Bryant. Her husband, 24-year-old Roy, owned the local store. Now, this story is widely disputed, even today.
Uh-oh.
Because according to Carolyn, Emmett allegedly grabs her, pulls her to him while saying obscene things, and then when he goes to leave, he's gonna wolf whistle at her.
What's a wolf whistle?
I'm glad you didn't know either, because I had to look it up.
I picture like the cartoon wolves, like the...
So I think this might be where they did that in cartoons, because a wolf whistle is apparently just kind of like a cat call. But I'd never heard of a wolf whistle before. But this story is going to go, you've got the white folks saying that Emmett put his hands on Carolyn and then also did the whistling or did whatever obscene things. There's all sorts of variations of the story, that he whipped out a picture of his white girlfriend up north, that he'd been with a lot of white ladies and he'd like her to be another.
Yeah.
Every version I've heard is like...
I thought you said he's 14.
He is. And I'm glad you did that too, because I realized in the 50s...
kids were older than...
Right.
Yeah.
But it doesn't sound like a logical story. Now, Emmett's friends would say he did not put his hands on her, or they didn't see him do any of that. That when they were leaving, I guess she went out to her car and he would whistle at her, and then they would all do like falling all over each other to get in their car to hurry up and leave. I think that's exactly what happened, because I can see a group of 14-year-old boys, one of them whistles at a party lady, and like remove color from the story altogether. I could see that happen now.
Yeah.
Of a group of boys, somebody whistles, and then they all fall over each other, like, it wasn't me, and like diving in the car to get out of there as quick as they can because they're 14-year-old obnoxious boys.
Yeah, because they're all of a sudden embarrassed. Yeah.
Yes, because it's more of a joke. They don't have that self-esteem to be a cocky little turd. But I think that's more likely what happened. And he's also 3 days into his trip, so it's just like he's always the jokester, the prankster, the one to make people laugh, or the lighthearted one of the group. I don't believe at all he laid a hand on her.
No.
But that story is the one his cousins would say that, like, they freaked out and wanted to get out of there because they knew in those parts, you don't do that. It's not funny. It's not a joke. Especially a black boy whistling at a white woman in Mississippi in that time period. It didn't happen.
I would have been more concerned with the fact that she's married. You're going to have her husband after you.
Well, they all couldn't get in the car fast enough and head home. And after a few days, nothing comes of it. The boys figure they're good to go, so they just go back to what they're doing. Now, little do they know that when Roy Bryant got home from his shrimping trip and found out about what happened, now mind you, he's going to hear the version his wife says, which practically has her as a rape victim. It was far from a joke to him, and he is beyond livid. In his mind, the boy's behavior was crude and violated the etiquette of Jim Crow, and because of that, it required punishment, or else other black fellers would start behaving in the same way.
Ugh.
So he starts talking to everybody around town to try to figure out who the hell this person is. Mind you, he's being fueled by his racial fear and hate for his vigilante justice. Now, it won't take him long to figure out who Emmett was. So Roy and his half-brother J.W. Millam drive over to Emmett's great-uncle's house, Moses, on Sunday, August 28th at 2 a.m. They'd be banging on that door until the preacher answers. Roy would demand to see Emmett. Now, mind you, he kind of shoves his way into the house. He's armed with a .45 pistol.
Oh, gosh.
And now, mind you, Emmett's asleep. So when they barge in, they tell him to get dressed because he's coming with them.
That's scary.
Yeah, they're terrified. You don't want to bring on any sort of that white hatred towards your direction is what I would imagine. They're terrified. So they're trying to defuse this situation because they're also...
That, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you've got people barging into your house with weapons.
Yes, but it'd be scary enough. But I feel like there's a lot of fear of what the white folk are going to do.
Yeah.
Like, they can't make this situation worse. So they're trying to defuse it in everything that they can, of like begging them not to take Emmett, of they'll pay whatever they want, do whatever they want, just don't take him. I mean, if whatever he did, you can beat him here, just don't leave with him. Which I did do a darty-eyed thing, but I get the whole, for that time period, people just did what the fuck they wanted to do.
That's really scary.
It's scary that's the level they were on, of whatever you have to do to teach him his lesson, put him in his place, just don't take him. But they're not having any of it. They were bound and determined to teach him a lesson he wouldn't soon forget. Now Roy tells Moses that he better not say a word to anyone that they were here, or he's going to come back for him. Now they put Emmett in the pickup truck that they drove over there to, and they drive off. Now, later in the day, when Emmett doesn't return home, Moses goes to the authorities despite the threat against him.
That's brave.
I thought that so too, because I was just like, I'm surprised he didn't wait longer, of like when the sun went down kind of thing, but he knew
it was bad. It was going to be, yeah.
It was bad, and he might very well be next, but he went anyway. And the authorities would go to Roy and JW, who would say, yeah, we picked up Emmett. We let him go after we had a word with him. It's not our fault if he didn't make it back home.
It kind of is.
Now, 3 long, excruciating days would go by, and on August 31st would be the day that a naked body is pulled from the Tallahatchie River and identified by a ring on his hand, since he wore his dad's ring, as being Emmett. Because again, that body was so badly mutilated that you couldn't tell that that was Emmett.
That's so sad.
So the sheriff would order that Emmett be buried ASAP. But Emmett's mom is like, she's going to insist that he be returned to her in Chicago. Now, despite several attempts by authorities to bury Emmett, he would in fact return to his mother, and Mamie would demand an open casket as well as a public viewing from September 3rd to the 6th to show the world what happened to her boy.
That is intense.
Dude, I don't know if I would have done the same thing, but I feel so much for her. There's pictures in our email of what he looked like, and I can't even imagine having to see your child in the condition he was in. But the fact that she had the strength to stand up and get him back, because if they were able to bury him, she'd never seen what he endured, and neither would have the world, and it would have been something that was quieted. But she invites reporters from magazines and everything to come see him, and like it becomes a national news story because it's just like, you can't see it and not be horrified by what people did to a 14-year-old young man.
Yeah, over nothing.
Thousands of people are going to come out to see Emmett. Pictures are going to be published in papers and magazines of Emmett's body. So it comes to a point where no longer can anyone ignore the racism and violence that's occurring in the South. And it's considered one of the tipping points that leads to the civil rights movement. And I can tell you, I don't remember hearing about this in school at all. I know Rosa Parks' story, which Emmett, his case came before that. And for it to be considered a marker of the civil rights movement, I don't know if when we went to school, they just coasted over this one because it's so violent, but I'd never heard of Emmett.
Me either, but I think it's because of the level of violence.
So 100 days after Emmett's murder, Rosa Parks would stand her ground by refusing to move from her bus seat. And the civil rights movement is kind of starting with all this. And the NAACP would tour the country with Mamie so she could tell the story of what happened to Emmett and how she got her boy back.
You would think that would be more in the educational system. You know what I mean?
I'm surprised. You should ask your children if they've heard of Emmett Till, because I don't understand, other than it's so violent. There's no way, or they don't want to expose children to that level. They can talk about Rosa Parks, but Emmett is kind of intense of a story to tell. But I feel like in high school it's not.
Well, and maybe the sexual nature of it, because it's disputed. That, and it sounds like the lady in the beginning that started all this was a liar, and she just said some extra in her story to get her husband riled up.
Yeah. Now, Emmett's murderers would be charged, and their trial would start that September. And I was baffled because that's super quick.
Wait, he was killed in August, or found in August, right?
Mm-hmm.
The trial started in September?
September of the same year.
Okay.
Now, so the trial would get underway. Now, first, you do the jury selection and all that.
Mm-hmm.
It would end up being a jury of all white men. In order to be a juror, you had to be registered to vote. So in the 1950s, 45% of the population were black. But in the county that they're doing the trial, 2/3 of the population's black. So you would think that a jury of his peers, it shouldn't be of all white men. However, barely in the state, barely 5% were registered to vote. Some counties didn't have one black voter, and that was explained away as, the black population, they don't want to vote, which wasn't true at all. They were just scared they would lose their jobs or be harmed. So then it was a concoction that, okay, if you want to vote, you have to pass this test first. You have to read and interpret what it says. Now, mind you, there was a high illiteracy rate, so that eliminated a lot of people from being able to vote, which they continued, so that if you can't read, you can't pass the test. But then you would have educated individuals go to take the test, and they would read and interpret what they were told to. And since it's left up to a white man to decide, they would be like, oh no, you didn't interpret that right, you can't vote. And I'm talking about college-educated black citizens.
Hey, and as for a jury of his peers, I'm assuming the guys that were arrested were white, right?
Right. But that is how just so you know, that's how he ends up with an all-white jury. but it's just like that level of unfairness for this era is just...
Well, right, but...
So the trial is going to kick off September 19th, 1955. It's 4 days of testimony. Some witnesses would be called that would say Emmett only whistled at Carolyn on their way out, and then he barely stuttered a goodbye to her, but he did not touch her. And when I said when he did that wolf whistle, it wasn't even in the shop. So I feel like we said before that it's just boys screwing off, and it was a joke. It wasn't she was a near rape victim, and that Carolyn had lied about him touching her, and it got way out of control when Roy decided he had to exact his revenge. Now, Moses Wright, Emmett's great-uncle, would testify that they were the men who forced their way into his home at gunpoint and took Emmett, which would mark the first time a black man testified to the guilt of a white man in the state of Mississippi.
Man, I'm so surprised this case is not more in the education system.
Yeah, it's got a lot of firsts.
Yeah.
And it made me sick reading it. I know I've got a lot of historical things in here, but I feel like you can't really understand what Emmett went through and his mom and the whole time period without knowing what was going on.
Right.
Now, even though there's a ton of evidence against Roy and JW, they're going to be acquitted after just 1 hour of deliberation.
Of course.
A journalist would interview jurors that would say they knew they were guilty, but they didn't feel imprisonment or the death penalty were appropriate punishments for killing a black person.
Ew.
That mentality alone is just disgusting.
It's vile. Like, these people are just as guilty as Roy and JW for killing Emmett.
Yeah.
You know he did it, or you know they did it, and you're not going to hold them accountable?
Well, in their mind, they didn't do anything wrong. I can't even get behind that thought process to even begin to understand what the fuck.
Wow.
And I really can't even fathom how there were so many people that had that same belief system.
Not to compare it, but you've heard of the Holocaust, right? Them Germans, there were lots of them.
No, Andrea, I haven't.
Shut up.
But later on, the two would confess to kidnapping and murdering Emmett in a magazine article when they are paid for their story. They both will sign affidavits to their, that they can't take it back kind of thing. So the magazine can print their confessions without them being like, nah, I take it back.
Yeah.
But because they were already acquitted, they can't be retried because it would be double jeopardy. Now, they could have been tried for the whole kidnapping because initially they weren't charged for Emmett's kidnapping, but no one opts to pursue that charge. But I feel like it was also that a jury wouldn't convict white men for killing a black man. So why are they gonna? And they knew they were guilty then, so they're not going to convict them.
It's really disturbing.
Yeah. Now, some articles would say they got $4,000, and then another one said $10,000. So I don't know exactly how much they were paid for their confession, but the fact that they were paid at all also pissed me off.
That's a lot of money back then.
It's a fuck ton of money for but they shouldn't get anything. They should be in jail. They should be dead.
They should be. Not making money.
Now, of course, since they walk out unscathed, that they're holding their heads up high. They're getting paid for their story. I'm sure they're getting pats on the back when they get home. This was such a joke because you figure Emmett is barely dead before their trial starts. It's a joke of a trial, and then they're let out.
The South was a fucked up place.
It was so fucked up. So the two men would admit to barging into Moses's house armed with a .45 caliber handgun early in the morning when they took Emmett. But they would claim Emmett came willingly.
Liars.
Yeah. Now, Emmett's relatives would say, that's not true. He didn't go willingly. He was scared. They kidnapped him. As they walked out of their house, each one of the men had one of Emmett's arms, and no one could do anything to stop it. Then they drove out to Roy's barn, stripped Emmett naked, tied him up, and proceeded to torture him all through the night.
Poor baby.
And if you're wondering about the naked part, apparently it was all too common in these times that during a lynching, there would be genital mutilation. There would be times that men would be castrated in front of a crowd before being burned or lynched. There were also times that the executioner would cut off fingers, ears, even skin faces or parts of the person and toss them into the crowd as souvenirs.
That's disgusting.
It's so revolting, and it feels like it should be in like the 1600s and not 19 anything. But I was just like, what the fuck is wrong with everyone in this time period? Like, literally, what the fuck? I would not be a part of a crowd that is collecting body parts of someone. I don't care what they're. No.
No, especially a child.
Yeah. I didn't find anything that said what their torture involved, but I feel like also with him being in the water for 3 days, I feel like it'd be hard to figure out if they're not going to say what exactly they removed off of him or did to him. There's no telling.
Poor baby.
You know?
Yeah.
But I feel like they probably did. Now, JW said, I just made up my mind. Chicago boy, I said. I'm tired of them sending your kind down here to stir up trouble. God damn you. I'm going to make an example out of you. Just so everybody can know how me and my folks stand. He would also say that if a colored man got close to a white woman, he was pretty much tired of living anyway. It was especially so when he claimed Emmett refused to get down on his knees and beg for mercy, so they try to blame Emmett that if he would have begged for mercy, they would have been nicer to him, but he just refused to cry. And originally, they just planned to kidnap him and whip him with that .45 caliber gun to scare some sense into him and pretend like they were going to throw him off the bluff into the river, but Emmett wouldn't give in. So they would smash him across the head with that .45 several times in the barn, and Emmett never hollered out. They even gouged out one of his eyes.
Oh my gosh.
Uh-huh. Now, there were some other black people in the area who would be woken up by screams and kind of just either like just poke their head out to be like, what the hell's going on? And they would hear a whole lot of cries of pain, awful noises, just lots of begging, even hearing him cry out for his mom.
Poor baby.
So it's just like JW and Roy are so full of shit when they're like, oh no, he wasn't begging for mercy. But it's just like they also, when they realized there were people who were hearing what they were doing, they would do the whole, did you hear anything? And whoever was out there would be like, nope.
It's disgusting.
It's going to be just after 7 a.m. when they finally have their fill. JW would fire the shot that would hit Emmett in the side of the head, and he would fall down dead. Then they would take the cotton gin fan blade, tie it to his neck with that barbed wire, and toss his body into the river. Now, the article that had that confession would finish with, the majority of the white people in Mississippi either approve Millam's actions or else they don't disprove enough to risk giving their enemies the satisfaction of a conviction.
Ugh.
Right.
Mississippi is awful.
I can tell you this whole thing, I don't understand how I didn't know of this story to begin with. But I feel like everybody needs to know Emmett's story because it's so scary that 1950 is really not that long ago when you think about it.
It's not that long ago.
And the fact that people were doing the things that they were doing and they weren't even getting convicted for it because everybody didn't see a problem with it is just
vile.
So disturbing to me. Like, I kept going down rabbit holes of, it's not like this is an isolated event. This is just like, what in the fuck?
Poor kid. His poor mom.
Oh, I can't feel, I feel the same way of like his mom.
Like, I feel disgusted.
Right. There's no other way to feel about that other than there was no justice ever for Emmett. And it's so disgusting. And these fuckers made money off of it. Well, fast forward to 2007, Representative John Lewis would sponsor a bill called the Emmett Till Unsolved Civil Rights Crime Act that would allow investigation and prosecution on cold cases from the civil rights related cases that occurred before 1979. Now, it's going to be made into law by 2008. But that gives the FBI the ability to reopen this case. And the weird thing was, so the arrest warrant for JW and Roy also listed Carolyn, but Carolyn was never arrested. And I don't know if that's because she is a lady, so they just didn't do anything with her. But she was on that arrest warrant.
That's weird.
So the FBI is going to re-flip through all this, and they're also going to get a hold of a 99-page memoir of Carolyn's account. Now, Carolyn's version of everything flip-flops a lot. Now, in the court, they don't mention really Carolyn being involved at all. But then Carolyn will say that they brought Emmett to her to identify before they headed to the barn. And she would tell them that she told Roy that wasn't him, but Roy would scream at her to look at him and tell him that this was who did it, what she had accused. And because of her story flip-flopping and then what happened in the store, or whether it happened at all, whether he touched her, whether he didn't touch her, flip-flops all over the place. Other than Carolyn's a liar, that's the only thing you can really get out of this, that she told a huge whopper. She told several different whoppers and then waffled between all the stories.
It sounds like she waffled because when her husband brought her a young black boy and was demanding to know if that was him, she realized the seriousness of her whoppers. And rather than take the beating herself for being a liar, she lied and said it was him.
Well,
she's disgusting. Hey, how come they couldn't use the interviews that Roy and JW did in the paper that they got paid for?
So I did read an article on that one that said because they never denied being guilty, they just went on trial for it, and they never went on the stand saying they didn't do anything, and they were acquitted. So that was why apparently they weren't in danger of a double jeopardy, that they had asked their lawyer before they did their confession and proceeded with the magazine confession, is because since they never denied doing it, they just went on trial, which is why I say it was also a joke, because it's just like, that wasn't even a real trial. But so the FBI tries to pursue charges against Carolyn, who's now 73, right? But then when they take that information to the Mississippi grand jury, they decline to indict her.
Of course.
Now, Carolyn's going to die in 2023 at the age of 88. And it's not going to be until 2022 that lynching would be made a federal hate crime. And I did a lot of blinking because I can't even believe it took us till 2022 to make that a federal hate crime.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
But they would pass that with the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act.
Wow. What happened to Roy and JW? Do you know?
No, I really didn't want to dig into them anymore because they're disgusting. They probably went on to be politicians because it was just Alabama, Louisiana, and Mississippi. They were probably royalty.
That's disturbing.
It's disgusting. They deserve to have been shot where they stood.
I agree. But
I ended up finding a bunch of cases. Like I said, this wasn't an isolated event. And I found one of Meager Evans. He was a World War II veteran who went to register to vote and was met with a mob of gun-wielding whiteys. Naturally, he's livid. He fought for America. He fought for freedom outside the United States, and he comes back to this crap. And I agree with him. I'd be pissed alongside of him because you can lay down your life for your country and then come back to, you can't vote though.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
He was also denied entry into the University of Mississippi's law school. And when he's denied there, he ends up getting a job for the NAACP. Now, on June 7th, he would end up as the NAACP field director. He would tell a crowd during a civil rights protest that freedom has never been free. I love my children and I love my wife with all my heart, and I would die and die gladly if that would make a better life for them.
Oh my gosh.
He's going to be shot and killed just 5 days later on his way home. Now, Byron Beckwith would be arrested for his murder, and he's going to be set free after 2 trials that ended in hung juries.
Oh my gosh.
He later runs for lieutenant governor. And on another side note, because like I said, during this case, it was opening all sorts of awful doors. But did you know the Democratic Party ran on a platform of being the white supremacy party?
Are you serious? That's kind of funny now. Not funny, haha, but like ironic funny.
No, like, yeah. But they were also, they had a club.
I'm sure.
They called it the White Citizens Council, which was referred to as the Uptown Klan across the South. And I was like, never heard of that either.
No.
But they encouraged mobs to prevent schools and universities from being integrated. And then I kind of I hate Mississippi and Louisiana and Alabama.
You're a bunch of racist assholes, is what it sounds like.
I know I live down in the South, but they have such a horrific history.
They do.
Now, by early 1960, Mississippi is the poorest state in the nation, and 86% of all non-white families are living below the national poverty line.
Well, yeah, because if they try to do better, they're being tortured and killed.
Lynched?
Yeah.
I forgot to tell you in the beginning of this was another case of our listener, Paulina, sent our way. And man, can she find some doozies, because this one fucked with me pretty serious.
Yeah. Thanks for that one, Clara and Paulina. That was a disturbing history of Mississippi.
The disturbing history of the United States.
Well, yeah, but this one in particular.
Definitely ask your children if they heard of Emmett, because I'd be curious if that's on a curriculum.
You can ask them tomorrow when you see them.
Oh, that's true. But I am still devastated that such a gruesome act by two adult men to a little boy.
Yeah. I feel sorry for his mom.
Oh, so sorry.
I'm proud of her too, also, if that makes sense. Maybe that's...
She had a lot of courage.
Yeah.
I think her love for her baby boy, and also, I mean, don't talk about an example of taking your pain and not just letting it sweep under the rug. Like, if she would have just been bullied into them burying Emmett, and they knew they did wrong because they wouldn't have tried to bury him several times before sending him back to his mother.
Yeah.
And frankly, I don't know how she was able to get his body back.
I found it baffling. The only thing I can figure is maybe because the North wasn't as bad as the South. It doesn't sound like it was great, but it wasn't as bad, that maybe she was able to get somebody to fight for her that wasn't a complete racist.
Yeah, but I'm just surprised they didn't do something of, we don't know where the body went.
Oh, that would have been really messed up.
This whole thing was disgusting.
Yeah, but that would have been even worse. Like, at least she was able to get some sort of closure and fight for her boy.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that they didn't go back and kill his great uncle for going to the police.
Yeah.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Homicide Hobbies. If we made you laugh, if we made you cry, or if we mindfucked you for the day, then we thank you for listening. Please write a review on whatever you're listening to us on. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your coworkers. We're freaking awesome. And join us next week for another episode of Homicide Hobbies. I'm Andy.